Good afternoon, psychology class. As promised, I am making your video of chapter 14, and if I feel like I have time, I may just do a video of chapter 12 so that we can have an open discussion about chapter 12 on Wednesday. All right, today is October the 20th something, 22nd possibly, and in our syllabus we are a few days behind, but we'll get caught up, so don't worry. So we are looking at chapter 14 this week. We're on this begins week 10, but we're on week 9's discussion, personality and self-motivation. And so I'll go over chapter 14. You do some work. You've already done your motivation paper, which you've already done a lot of work on this particular chapter, but we just need to cover it because it's in our syllabus. So I'll cover it here and watch it at your own leisure. And when we come together on Wednesday, we'll pick up on chapter 12, which is a review because we went through chapter 12 before. We'll do some in-depth studies on the content of chapter 12. All right, so personality. Personality is one's characteristics, patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting. This is just a preview. It's an overview of what this chapter is about. Psychodynamic theories focus on the unconscious and early childhood experiences, such as Sigmund Freud. In his psychoanalytic perspective, proposed that childhood sexuality and unconscious motives influence personality. Remember, Sigmund Freud did the id, the ego, and the superego? For Sigmund Freud, conflict between pleasure-seeking biological impulses and social restraints centered on the three interacting systems: id, ego, superego. Freud believed that children develop through psychosexual stages and that people's later problems are rooted in how they resolve conflicts associated with those stages. Aha! The Neo-Freudians agreed with Freud's basic idea, but placed more emphasis on the conscious mind and on social influences. Who are my friends? Who do I socialize with? And what am I thinking? Today's psychodynamic theorists agree with many of Freud's views, but not his idea that sex is the basis of personality. That would be horrible. Contemporary research confirms that more than most of us realize, our lives are guided by unconscious information processing. The humanistic perspective emphasized the growth potential of healthy people. Abraham Maslow believed that if basic human needs are met, remember he did the hierarchy of needs, people will strive to actualize their highest potential. Carl Rogers suggested that being genuine, accepting, and empathetic helps others to develop a positive self-concept. The trait perspective attempts to describe the predisposition that underlie our actions. Through factor analysis, researchers have isolated 5 distinct dimensions of personality. People's specific behaviors vary across situations as their inner dispositions interact with particular environments. This is just an overview of all of those terms and concepts that we'll go over. The social cognitive perspective emphasizes how internal personal factors combine with environmental and influence our behavior. More than other perspectives, it builds from research on learning, cognition, social behaviors. Researchers assess how people's behaviors and beliefs both affect and are affected by their situations. Currently, the self is one of the Western psychology's more vigorously researched topic. Studies confirm that benefits of positive self-esteem, but also Studies confirm the benefits of positive self-esteem, but also point to the possible hazards of unrealistic high self-esteem. Compared with defensive self-esteem, secure self-esteem depends less on external evaluations and enables us to lose ourselves in relationship and purposes larger than self. Enables us to lose ourselves in relationships and purposes larger than self. All right, here's some fact or falsehoods. Freud believed that boys develop unconscious sexual desires for their mother when they are between 3 and 6 years of age. What do you think? It's true. We see that in the Oedipus complex. One of the most reliable and valid measures of personality is the Rorschach ink blot test. False. Freud believed that personality forms during the first years of life. True. All right, we'll come back to the facts and falsehood. Some of these questions you will see again, so take note. All right, so just in our introduction, our question that we're going to look at is describe historically significant and current theories that inform our understanding of personality. Psychologists consider personality to be an individual's, your personal characteristics, your patterns of thinking, your feeling, and your acting, your behavior plays a big part in that. Psychoanalytic theory proposed that childhood sexuality and unconscious motivation influences personality. So you've got a stream of consciousness, a working knowledge, and you've got some unconscious scripts playing in the back of your head. That's influencing some behavior as well. The humanistic approach focuses on inner capacities for growth and self-fulfillment. Later theorists built upon these two perspectives. Trait theories, for example, examine characteristic patterns of behaviors, traits. Social cognitive theories explore the interaction between people's traits, including their thinking and their social context. Now moving on. Psychodynamic theories discuss how Sigmund Freud's treatment of psychological disorders led to his view of the unconscious mind. So psychodynamic theories of personality view human behavior as a dynamic interaction between the conscious and unconscious mind, including their associative motives and conflicts. These theories are developed from Freud's psychoanalysis, his theory of personality, and the associated treatment techniques. In his private practice, Freud found that nervous disorders often made no neurological sense. So he began to piece together his patients' accounts from their lives. He took account of their experiences. He concluded that their disorders had no psychological basis, no psychological causes. His effort to understand these causes led to the discovery of the unconscious, to which we use now in therapeutic treatments, dealing with what's not being seen. Initially, he thought hypnosis might unlock the door to the unconscious. However, recognizing patients' uneven capacity for hypnosis, Freud turned to what's called free association. So this is where he would have his clients sit in a chair and he would have them just begin to state a word or a phrase, just whatever's in their stream of consciousness, begin to associate different words with different things. Freud believed in the mind is mostly hidden. Freud believed the mind is mostly hidden. Our unconscious experience is like the part of the iceberg that floats above the surface. Now, many of you have seen the iceberg where there's a huge amount of it that's below the ocean surface, and just a peak of it stands out. So psychologists of today took that analogy or that picture, and it's in your book. They took that picture and they gave an illustration as to how this id, ego, and superego works together. Below the surface is a much larger unconscious, which contains thoughts, wishes, feelings, and memories of which we are largely unaware. Although we repress these thoughts, they seep out, according to Freud, in our beliefs, in our daily habits, in our troubling symptoms. Some of these thoughts we store temporarily in a pre-conscious area, from which we can retrieve them in conscious awareness. All right, so let's take a look at some of your slides. I did upload your lecture slides to the Populi. All right, personality. We told you definition of personality is individual characteristics, patterns of thinking. Introduction to personality and psychodynamic theory. So I covered those theories. Freud's psychoanalytic perspective. Observed patients whose disorder had no clear explanation. He concluded that their problems reflected unacceptable thoughts and feelings hidden away in the unconscious mind. So this is just on your first set of slides. And then it gives you a list of terms to learn, to understand. All right, Freud's idea of the mind structure, we talked about that iceberg beneath the surface. So that's on page 2 of your slides. So just catching you up on your slides. Freud's personality structure. Freud believed that personality results from the mind's 3 systems. The id operates on pleasure principles, unconsciously strives to satisfy basic drives to survive, reproduce, and aggress. Ego operates on the reality principle, seeks to realistically gratify its impulses to bring long-term pleasure, contain perceptions, thoughts, judgments, and memories. Now the superego focuses on the ideal behavior. It strives for perfection, never satisfied. It's always another level to go. Acts as a moral conscience. All right. Describe Freud's view of personality. And so we just went through that. Freud believed that personality arises from our efforts to resolve the conflict between our biological impulses and the social restraints against them. So he theorized the conflict centered around the interacting systems, the id, the superego, and the ego. In review, id, testing effect, operates the pleasure principle. Ego function as the reality principle. Superego internalizes a set of ideas. The superego's demands often oppose the ids and the ego as the executive part of the personality seeks to reconcile the two. Identify the development stages proposed by Freud. All right, Freud maintained that children pass through a series of psychosexual stages, during which the id's pleasure-seeking energies focus on distinct pleasure-sensitive areas of the body called erogenous zones. During that oral stage, if anybody has any kids, 0 to 18, everything goes in the mouth. During the anal stage, 18 to 36 months, it centers around bowel and bladder eliminations, where you're trying to learn, teach how to potty train. During the critical phallic stage, 3 to 6 years, pleasure centers around the genitals. They're fascinated with their body. Boys experience what's called that Oedipus complex, which unconscious sexual desires toward their mother and hatred of their father. They cope with these threatening feelings through identification with the father, thereby incorporating many of his values and developing a sense of what psychologists now call gender identity. The latency stage, 6 years to puberty, in which sexuality is dormant, gives way to the genital stage, puberty on, as sexual interests mature. All right, following along in your PowerPoint regression faced with mild stressors. Children, young orangutans seek for their caregivers. Freud might have interpreted these behaviors regression as a retreat to an earlier developmental stage. He's saying that something happened in childhood and you retreat back to that childhood stage. 6 well-known defense mechanisms. This is hard for me to read without my glasses, but you got young eyes, so you can go read that on page 2 at the bottom. All right. Identify the developmental stages proposed by Freud. Freud maintained that children pass through a series of psychosexual stages. And these are the stages that we just talked about: the id, the ego, the superego. You got the Oedipus complex. You got identification. You got fixate. In Freud's view, maladaptive adult behavior result from conflicts unresolved during the oral, anal, and phallic stages. At any point, conflict can look or fixate the person's pleasure-seeking energies in that stage. Right. Describe how Freud thought people defended themselves against anxiety. Defense mechanisms reduce or redirect anxiety in various ways, but always by unconsciously distorting reality. Regression, which underlines the other defense mechanisms, banishing anxiety arousing thoughts, feelings, and memories from the unconscious. Regression involves retreat to an earlier, more infantile stage of development, and reactions formation makes unacceptable impulses look like their opposites. Projection attributes threatening impulses to others. Rationalization offers self-justifying explanation for behavior. Displacement diverts impulses to a more acceptable object or person. And denial refuses to believe painful realities. Freud also viewed jokes as expression of repressed sexual and aggressive tendencies. I wonder what Freud would think of us today. And dreams as the royal road to the unconscious. The remembered content of dreams, their manifest content, he believed to be a censored expression of the dreamer's unconscious wishes, the dream's latent content. Identify which of Freud's ideas were accepted or rejected by his followers. The Neo-Freudians, we're on page 3 on your handout, accepted Freud's basic idea regarding personality structures. The importance of the unconscious, the shaping of personality in children, and the dynamics of anxiety and defense mechanisms, those were accepted. However, in contrast to Freud's, the Neo-Freudians generally place more emphasis on the conscious mind in interpreting experiences and coping with the environment. And they argued that we have more positive motives than sex and aggression. Unlike Alfred Adler and Karen Horney, Carl Jung agreed with Freud that the unconscious exerts a powerful influence. In addition, he suggested that the collective unconscious is a shared, inherited reservoir of memory. It traces our species' history. Contemporary psychodynamic theorists and therapists reject the notion that sex is the basic of personality, but agree with Freud that much of our mental life is unconscious, that we struggle with inner conflicts, and that childhood shapes our personalities and our attachment styles. Describe projective tests and how they are used, and discuss some criticisms of them. All right, projective tests such as ambiguous stimuli that are designed to trigger projection of one's inner dynamic. In Murray's thematic appreciation apperception test, it's the TAT, T-A-T, thematic apperception test. People view ambiguous pictures and make up stories about them, which are supposed to indicate their inner feelings and goals. The Rorschach ink blot test, which is a blot of ink, seeks to identify people's inner feelings and conflicts by analyzing their interpretations of 10 ink blots. Critics question the validity and the reliability of this test. Nonetheless, many clinicians continue to use it. I don't use it. Discuss how contemporary psychologists view Freud's psychoanalysis. Critics contend that many Freud-specific ideas are contradicted by new research and that his theories offer only an after-the-fact explanation. More recent findings question the overriding importance of childhood experiences, the degree of parental influence, and the timing of gender identity formation, the significance of childhood sexualities, and the existence of hidden latent contents in dreams. Many researchers believe that repression, if it ever occurs, is a rare mental response to a terrible trauma. Nevertheless, Freud drew psychology's attention to the unconscious and to our struggle to cope with anxiety and sexuality. Today's psychologists view the unconscious not as seething passions and repressive censoring, but as information processing that occurs without our awareness. All right. Discuss how modern research has developed our understanding of the unconscious. So contemporary research provides support for Freud's idea and his defense mechanisms. For example, his idea of projection is what researchers now call the false consensus effect. That we defend against anxiety is also evident in tests of terror management theory. Findings indicate that thinking about one's mortality provokes enough anxiety to increase contempt for others and esteem for oneself. Freud also focused attention on the conflict between biological impulses and social restraints. He reminds us of our potential for evil. We all have a potential for evil. Thank the Lord for the blood of Jesus. Unquestionably, his cultural impact has been enormous. Humanistic theories. All right, so let's find us in your handouts here. Assessing the self, trait theory, exploring traits, factor analysis, the person situation, controversy on page 6. All right, describe how humanistic psychologists view personality and explain their goal in studying personality. So humanistic theories. Page 4 at the bottom, evaluating humanistic theories. Humanistic theories view personality with a focus on the potential for healthy personal growth. According to Maslow, the guy with the hierarchy of needs who talked about self-actualization, this motivation was to fulfill one's highest potential and self-transcendence. It is the desire to find meaning and purpose beyond the self. It's one of the human needs to give outside of yourself. It is one of the ultimate psychological needs that arises after basic physical and physiological needs are met and self-esteem is achieved. In his effort to turn psychology's attention from the basic motives of troubled people to the growth potential of healthy people who are thought to be basically good, Maslow reflects the human perspective. Carl Rogers, in his person-centered perspective, agreed with Maslow that people are basically good and are endowed with self-actualizing tendencies. You can do well if you try. The nurture growth in others. To nurture growth in others, Rogers advised being genuine, empathetic, and accepting, offering unconditional positive regard, that agape love, unconditioned love. In such a climate, people can develop deeper self-awareness and a more realistic and positive self-conflict. It actually helps us to grow as people. Explain how humanistic psychologists assessed a person's sense of self. Humanistic psychologists assess personality through questionnaires on which people reported their self-concept. One questionnaire asked people to compare their actual self with the ideal self. Other humanistic psychologists maintain that we can only understand each person's unique experience through interviews and intimate conversations. It's that qualitative research. Describe humanistic theories. Describe how humanistic theories have influenced psychology. And discuss the criticisms they have faced. So you got Maslow and Rogers. Their ideas have influenced counseling, education, child raising, and management. Critics complain that the humanistic perspective's concepts are vague and subjective. For example, the description of self-actualizing people seems to be more reflective of Maslow's personal values than on a scientific description. Critics also argue that the individualism promoted by humanistic psychology may promote self-indulgence, selfishness, and an erosion of the moral restraints. A final complaint is that humanistic psychology fails to appreciate the reality of human capacity for evil. Its naive optimism may lead to an apathy about major social problems. So a few critics out there. Explain how psychologists use traits to describe personality. So exploring traits on page 5. Trait theorists attempt to describe personality in terms of stable and enduring behavioral patterns or dispositions to feel or act. Some theorists use dominant traits and their associated characteristics to describe personality traits. One technique trait theorists use to identify basic trait is factor analysis, a statistical procedure that identifies clusters of behaviors that tend to appear together. For example, through factor analysis, Hans and Seibel reduced normal variations to 2 or 3 genetically influenced dimensions, including extroversion, introversion, and emotional stability. These are all terms that you've probably heard. Instability. Brain activity scans suggest that extroverts and introverts differ in their level of arousal, with extroverts seeking stimulation because their normal brain arousal level is relatively low. Jerome Kagan maintains that by influencing autonomic nervous systems, reactivity, heredity also affects our temperament and behavioral style, which help define our personality. All right, identify some common misunderstandings about introversion and discuss whether extroversion leads to greater success in extroversion. Whether extroversion leads to greater success than introversion. People tend to equate introversion with shyness, but the two concepts differ. Introverted people seek low levels of stimulation from their environment because they are sensitive. Shy people, in contrast, remain quiet because they fear others will evaluate them negatively. People may also believe that introversion acts as a barrier to success. On the contrary, introversion has its benefits and supervisors. Introverts show greater receptiveness when their employees voice their ideas, challenging existing norms, and take charge. Under these circumstances, introvert leaders outperform extroverted ones. Woohoo, take one for the team. Introverted leaders outperform extroverted ones. Describe personality inventories and discuss their strengths and weaknesses as trait assessment tools. Psychologists assess several traits at once by administering personality inventories on which people respond to items designed to measure a wide variety of feelings and behaviors. The classic personality inventory is the MMPI, the Minnesota Multifaceted Personality Inventory, Although it assesses abnormal personality tendencies rather than normal personality tendency, the traits illustrate a good way to develop a personality inventory. The MMPI items were empirically derived, which means they've done some testing and is valid and reliable research. Identify the traits that seem to provide the most useful information about personality variations. Researchers have isolated 5 distinct personality dimensions. They're dubbed the Big Five: consciousness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, emotional stability versus instability, openness, and extroversion. The traits appear to be stable in adulthood. About 50% are a tad more heritable, descriptive of others around the world, and predictive of others' personal attributes. Locating an individual on these 5 dimensions provides a comprehensive picture of personality. Discuss whether research supports the consistency of personality traits over time and across situations. Although people's traits seem to persist over time, critics of the trait perspective note that human behavior varies widely from situation to situation and from people to people. Thus, traits are weak predictors of behavior. For example, being conscientious on one occasion is only modestly related to being conscientious on another occasion. Defenders of trait perspectives note that, despite their variations, a person's average behavior across different situations is fairly consistent. We do have distinct personality traits. Moreover, research that our traits are socially significant, they influence our health, our thinking, and our job performance. In informal social situations, our expressive styles, our animation, manner of speaking, and gestures are impressively consistent. Moreover, we can judge individual differences in expressiveness in a matter of seconds. Thus, we may form lasting impressions within a few moments of meeting people. All right, we're almost done here. Social cognitive theories of the self. Discuss how social cognitive theories view personality development and describe how they explore behavior. The social cognitive perspective. This is by Albert Bandura. He applies principles of learning, cognition, and social behavior to the understanding of personality. He has reciprocal determinism, refers to the interacting influences between personality and environmental factors. Interactions between individuals and environments often occur when different people choose different environments. When our personalities shape how we interpret and react to events, and when our personalities help create situations to which we react. Social cognitive researchers observe how people's behaviors and beliefs both affect and are affected by their situations. They have found the best way to predict someone's behavior in a given situation is to observe that person's behavior patterns in similar situations. So you check them out when they're at home, you check them out when you're at school, you check them out when you're at work. One of the predicting factors for let's see, maybe ADHD, one of the diagnosis criteria is if they have to have behavior that's similar in their school environment, in their work environment, in their home environment. And we take all of those behavioral assessments into consideration in order to have that diagnosis of ADHD. So you look at many different environments and you see if the symptoms and behaviors are consistent. All right. Exploring the self. Explain why psychology has generated so much research on the self, and discuss the importance of self-esteem to psychology and to the human well-being. All right, the self is one of Western psychology's most vigorously researched topic. Underlying this research is the assumption that the self, as organizer of our thoughts, feelings, and actions, is the center of personality. One example of research on the self is the study of possible selves. It explores people's visions of the self they dream of becoming. Such possible selves motivate us by laying out specific goals and calling forth the energy to work toward them. Another example is the study of the spotlight effect, which reflects our tendency to overestimate others, noticing and evaluating our appearance, performance, and blunders. And remember, we said we're our worst critic. People who have high self-esteem have fewer sleepless nights and are less conforming, make more positive Facebook posts, really, and are more persistent to difficult tasks, are less shy, anxious, and lonely, and are just plain happier. Self-efficacy, our sense of competence on a task, also pays dividends. Some research shows a destructive effect on low self-esteem. For example, temporarily deflating people's self-esteem can lead them to disparage others and express heightened racial prejudice. Other researchers suggest that self-esteem reflects reality. Thus, feeling good about oneself follows doing well. Feeling good about oneself follows doing well. I think that's worth repeating. According to this explanation, the best way to foster self-esteem in children is to help them meet challenges, not reward them despite their failure. Discuss how excessive optimism, blindness to one's own incompetence, and self-serving bias reveal the cost of self-esteem, and describe how defensive and secure self-esteem differ. All right, this will be the last thing that we cover today. We'll go back to some of those fact or falsehood questions since you've got the knowledge now. All right, discuss how excessive optimism, blindness to one's own incompetence, and self-serving bias reveal the cost of self-esteem, and describe how defensive and secure self-esteem differ. All right, success requires enough optimism to provide hope and enough pessimism to prevent complacency. Excessive optimism can blind us from real risk. People often display illusory optimism about their groups. Our natural positive thinking bias does seem to vanish, however, when we are bracing ourselves for feedback. Positive illusions also vanish after a traumatic personal experience. Ironically, people often are most overconfident when most incompetent. Interesting. Ironically, people are most overconfident when they are most incompetent. To judge one's competence and predict one's future performance, it pays to invite others' assessment, to ask questions, to check in with others about their presentation of you. Self-serving bias. Our readiness to perceive ourselves favorably, we all want to look at ourselves in that glorious light, is evident in our tendency to accept more responsibility for good deeds than for bad, and more for successes than for failures. We always want that pat on the back. Most people also see themselves as better than average. In fact, today's new generation, the generation of me, according to Jean Twenge, expresses more narcissism, excessive self-love, and self-absorption than previous generations. And this may have a lot to do with our social medias and the selfies and all of those. Look at me, and I'm drinking my coffee today, and how great that is for everybody in the world to see. Defense self-esteem is fragile and focused on sustaining the self, which makes failure and criticism feel like a threat. Like low self-esteem, defensive self-esteem correlates with antisocial behaviors. In contrast, secure self-esteem is less fragile because it depends less on external evaluations. You don't care what everybody says or who likes or don't like your Facebook post. If you think you're awesome, then you be awesome. Feeling accepted for who we are enables us to lose ourselves in relationships and purposes a larger self-esteem. So this is food for thought. All right, so going back to a couple of those fact or falsehoods, testing the fact. Psychologists generally agree that painful experiences commonly get pushed out of our awareness and into the unconscious. This is false. Dreams are disguised wish fulfillments that can be interpreted by a skilled analyst. This is false. Personality differences among dogs are as evident and as consistently judged as personality differences among humans. This is ironically true. Extroverts, more than introverts, prefer communicating by email. You can guess that one. False. From a few minutes inspection of our living and working spaces, someone can with reasonable accuracy assess our emotional stability. This is true. The best means of predicting future behavior is a personality test or an interviewer's intuition. False. The majority of people suffer from low self-esteem. Ironically, this is true. All right, that is your chapter 14 lecture. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. And I will see you on Wednesday. And Wednesday I will have a couple of videos for you on personality. And we will pick up on chapter 12, which gets us back on task for the end of the week. All right, God bless you, and I will see you on Wednesday. Once again, I apologize for missing out on today. Just had some unforeseeable crisis to occur, and we just have to pray Jesus take the wheel. Amen. All right, I will see you on Wednesday. Goodbye.